Hello everybody, it's tractor time with Mr. Mick, and I have a book that I absolutely love called The Big Red Barn by Eve Bunting. And we're standing in front of a big red barn here at Honker Flats Greenhouse. As we drove up here, my wife said this is her favorite day of the summer is to come to Honker Flats, so we're making our trip today. And I brought with me this book, The Big Red Barn by Eve Bunting. Now, I have to warn you, it's kind of a tearjerker. So when it gets to the end, I might just stare at the page and read and not look at you and make eye contact, or else I might get choked up. So I'm going to try my hardest to read it without getting choked up. But it's a wonderful book, but it's a tearjerker. The Big Red Barn. Our big red barn sat across the yard from our house. It was 10 times bigger than our house. Dad says that's because the barn sheltered a lot more creatures, like our cows and our fat pigs that wandered in and out of the barn all day long. Susie's pet goat, Gertrude, had her own stall. Susie taught Gertrude a bunch of tricks. She bows when Susie snaps her fingers, and she won't bow for anyone else. The hens roosted in the rafters at night. Abraham, our rooster, took the highest rafter. As the sun set, we saw him there, and the hens were fluffing their feathers like covers around their heads. A barn owl lived in the barn's darkest corner. We never saw where he was, we just saw his big yellow eyes. Once we heard a quick swoop of his wings, and we felt the air move, and then there was the tiny cry of a mouse. Susie and I didn't like that owl. We found a little mound of white bones in the owl's corner. They crumpled when we touched them. Grandpa says an owl does what he has to do, but Susie and I still don't like him. We had a nest of kangaroo mice in our barn. Susie took Emma down to see them. Emma's our new mom, now that Dad's married to her. I didn't want Susie to show Emma our mice, but she did it anyway. The mice lived in the corner farthest from the owl. Susie and I hoped they would never find them. It was lucky that our barn is so big. But that old owl's eyes are big too. The hayloft was up above. When you bounced on a bale, hay dust danced in the air, and the loft was warm and sneezy, and it smelled of summer. When you looked down, you could see how big the barn looked to Abraham when he was high up on his perch. The hayloft was where I went when I needed to cry. It was a very secret place. That's where I went when Mom died, and that's where I went the day that Dad brought Emma home too. Once I asked Dad why we always painted the barn red. He said, well, it was red to begin with when we bought this farm. I expect red barn paint is the cheapest kind out there, said Emma. Red are the color barns are, Grandma said. But Grandpa was the one who made the most sense. He says red's the easiest color to see. It's comforting to look across the fields and say, there she is, there's our big red barn, there's home. Grandpa always said the best things. We could see our barn almost every place we went. It was red against the green of the grass, or the brown of the newly plowed fields, or the white of the snow. There she is, I'd say, our big red barn, there's home. Of course, I didn't say it out loud. One night, in the middle of the night, our big red barn caught on fire. It was Grandpa who smelled the smoke. Grandpa doesn't sleep much anymore. He banged down our doors and yelled, fire, fire, there's fire in the barn. And we all woke up pretty quick. Emma called the fire department while the rest of us ran to the barn. Gertrude, Gertrude, Susie cried. The hayloft was ablaze and smoke oozed and billowed from the ventilators. We got Gertrude out, and the cows and the pigs, and the hens and Abraham fluttered wildly past us. Susie ran back to save the kangaroo mice, but the mouse nest was empty. We never did see that owl. Dad and Emma grabbed the big hose and got it going, and we carried buckets of water from the house. But the fire was winning. Oh, where's that darned fire engine? Grandma kept shouting. Well, it's too late anyway, Dad said. Once a barn starts on fire, it's just too late. We heard a slipping sort of crash inside, and Grandpa said, the loft is gone. The heat was so bad now that we had to stand back. I thought about how the loft was gone and the way it had smelled, and I began to cry. And I realized, now I have no place to go when I need to cry. And I remember how I had cried when Mom had died, and now I even cried harder. Then Susie started to cry. "Shut up," I said. "Why do you always have to do what I do?" And that's when we heard the fire engines. "A lot of use that will be now," Grandma said, but the firemen stretched their fat hoses so they reached all the way to the river, and they sucked up the water and poured it all over everything they could reach. "I'm sorry about your barn, Craig," Emma said to Dad, and Dad put his arm around her. I just walked away. Susie and I leaned out our bedroom window for the longest time that night. The barn was burned all the way to the ground, and everything was a mess of mud and water, and there was a terrible smell of smoke. The cows and the pigs and the hens and Gertrude were in the yard, mooing and grunting and baaing and clucking and looking sorry for themselves. "Will Dad build another barn?" Susie asked. "He has to," I said. "It won't be the same," said Susie. I knew that. 3 days later, the bulldozers came, and when they were gone, there was no trace of the old barn. The new one came in big pieces. Prefabricated aluminum, Dad called it. Wood's not cheap anymore. "What does prefabricated mean?" I asked. "Well, it means it's big pieces that fit together like a giant jigsaw puzzle," said Dad. "The new barn would be as big as the old one and shaped the same." "I thought we'd like that best," Dad said, but I didn't like it at all. Dad bought some hay from Johnny Culbertson down the road. You ever find what started that fire?" Mr. Culbertson asked him. "Well, they figured that a rat gnawed through some of the wiring," Dad said. I thought about that a lot. A rat's teeth chewing and chewing, and now our big red barn was gone. Forever. The new barn was finished, and it shone silver in the sun. There's the new barn, and there was the old red barn. But he doesn't like that new silver barn as much. Susie got to lead Gertrude into the barn first. Then we shooed all the cows and pigs in to let them see it. They weren't a bit happy. The hens and Abraham skittered about the yard and wouldn't be shooed anywhere. "Let them be," Emma said. "Change is hard. It'll take time." "You're wrong," I thought. "It's so clean," Susie complained. "And it smells like a tin box," I said. I ran down to the river where the beaver had dammed it up. I wish I could go to the old hayloft because that's the way I felt, but the old hayloft was gone. I lay in the grass for a while, and then I sat up and I watched Emma hanging clothes on the clothesline, and Susie was helping her. Once Emma bent down and smoothed back of Susie's hair. They were far enough away so that if I squinched my eyes, I could pretend that Emma was Mom. Then I heard Grandpa's whistle, and I answered it. He sat in the grass next to me and began to skim stones. "You think we should paint the new barn?" he asked. "Red paint won't make it like the old barn," I said. "No," Grandpa said. "What's gone is gone. We have to let it go. The new barn's not going to take the old barn's place." I sounded fierce, and I felt fierce. Inside me, things seemed to be boiling over. "That's right," Grandpa said. "The new barn has to make its own place. If we give it a chance." We sat there, and I couldn't tell when he looked across the field if he was looking at the barn or if he was looking at Emma. Grandpa always knew how I felt. "It's not wrong to forget?" I asked. "Who said anything about forgetting?" Grandpa said. "We won't forget." Then for some reason, the boiling inside me seemed to ease up and slow down. I shaded my eyes and I looked at the sun shimmering over the barn. And I wanted to like it. It was part of our family now, part of us. Inside, the pigs and the cows and Gertrude were doing their best to make it smell the way the old barn had smelled. The kangaroo mice might even come back, and even the old owl. "I expect silver's the next best color for a barn after red," I told Grandpa. "I expect so," said Grandpa. The Big Red Barn. Thanks to Honker Flats.